Sunday evening. You haven't done anything wrong. The dishes are clean. The week hasn't started yet. And still, somewhere in your chest, something tightens. A low, quiet dread. Not quite fear. Not quite sadness. Just a heaviness that arrives without being invited. You probably call it Sunday scaries. Or the Monday feeling. Something about the end of rest and the beginning of obligation that lands in the body like a small weight. But here's what's strange. That feeling, the exact shape of it, has been documented across thousands of years. Across cultures that had no concept of a Monday. Across people who had never heard of a work week, a deadline, or a calendar with 7 boxes in a row. The dread didn't begin with your job. It began much, much earlier than that. To understand why Sunday evenings feel the way they do, you have to go back to a world before Sundays existed at all. For most of human history, the vast, overwhelming majority of our time on this planet, there was no such thing as a 7-day week. That structure was invented. Specifically, it was invented by the Babylonians, somewhere around 600 BCE, as an administrative system for organizing labor and religious observance. 7 days because of 7 celestial bodies visible to the naked eye. The sun, the moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Each day named for a god. Each god assigned a day of work or rest according to ritual. The Romans borrowed it. Early Christianity shaped it. And somewhere in that transmission, the concept of a day of rest, one day set apart from the others, became built into the architecture of the week. But here's the thing. The week was an idea. The dread is much older. Before the Babylonians organized time into 7-day blocks, before Egyptian farmers tracked lunar cycles to know when to plant, before any of that, humans were already living inside the rhythm of obligation and release. They just didn't have names for it. Hunter-gatherer communities, which is what all human communities were for roughly 95% of our species' existence, operated on a different kind of cycle. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests most of these groups worked intensively for 2 to 4 days, hunting, foraging, moving, and then rested. Not because someone told them to, because the body demanded it, because the game had been caught and didn't need chasing, because the berries had been gathered and there was nothing left to do until tomorrow's search began. Rest was not a reward. It was a rhythm, a biological pulse. And then it ended. And then the pulse moved back into effort. And something in the shift, the moment the body knew it was time to move again, carried a feeling that was not quite joy. Effort in the ancient world was dangerous. You hunted or you starved. You moved or you fell behind the group. You faced predators, unpredictable weather, physical injury, the real and constant possibility that what you were about to do might kill you. The body knew this, and so the transition out of rest and back into effort was never easy. It was never supposed to be easy. That transition has a physiological signature. A rise in cortisol, a narrowing of attention, a background hum of low-level arousal that the ancient brain used to prepare the body for what was coming. We still have that response. We just call it anxiety about the week ahead. There's a hormone called cortisol that most people associate with stress. But that framing is a little misleading. Cortisol isn't a stress signal. It's a mobilization signal. It's the body's way of saying, something is about to be required of you. Get ready. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a daily cycle. It peaks in the morning, highest right around the time you wake up, and tapers through the day. This is called the cortisol awakening response, and it exists to do exactly what the name suggests. It wakes you up to face what's coming. But cortisol is also sensitive to anticipated effort, to the knowledge that something difficult is approaching. Research shows cortisol can begin to rise before a stressful event. Not during it, not after it, but before. The body doesn't wait for the threat to arrive. Prepares. Sunday evening, for most people in the modern world, is a cortisol event. The anticipation of Monday's demands, the meetings, the commute, the performance, the exposure, triggers that ancient mobilization system hours before any of it actually happens. This is not a malfunction. This is the system working exactly as designed. Your nervous system is doing what nervous systems have done for hundreds of thousands of years. Reading the horizon for what's coming and beginning to prepare the body for it. The problem, the source of so much modern suffering, is that the ancient system was calibrated for a world where the threats it was preparing you for were physical, immediate, and resolvable within hours. You either caught the prey or you didn't. You either outran the predator or you didn't. By nightfall, the outcome was known. Modern threats don't resolve. A difficult colleague, a looming deadline, a performance review, these don't conclude by sundown. They stretch across days, weeks, months. The cortisol keeps rising. There's no release. The body stays in preparation mode long after preparation has stopped serving any useful function. But the ancient architecture is still there. Every Sunday evening, the mammalian brain reads the approaching return to effort and fires the same signal it's been firing for hundreds of thousands of years. The signal that says, rest is ending. The world is about to ask something of you. In the ancient world, that signal kept you alive. In the modern one, it just ruins your Sunday. Here's what the historical record actually shows. And this is where it gets surprisingly human. The oldest written complaints about work are roughly 5,000 years old. Sumerian clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia contain administrative records, yes, grain inventories, property transactions, cattle counts. But they also contain something else. Notes on workers who didn't show up. Records of absenteeism. Complaints from supervisors about labor that arrived late, left early, or simply didn't appear at all. The ancient Egyptians who built the monuments at Deir el-Medina, a workers' village outside Luxor that archaeologists have studied extensively, left behind what are essentially the world's first workplace absence records. Papyrus documents dating to around 1250 BCE list the reasons workers did not come to the site on a given day. Among the reasons recorded, he was ill. His mother was ill. He was brewing beer. He was having an argument with his wife. He was feeling sad. He was feeling sad. 3,250 years ago, a man who cut stone for a living in the desert heat of ancient Egypt wrote down that he did not come to work because he was feeling sad. And someone had to record it, file it, store it on papyrus that would survive millennia so that we could read it now and recognize ourselves completely. The Romans wrote extensively about the weight of obligation. Seneca, writing in the 1st century CE, described the exhaustion of returning to duty after a period of rest with almost clinical precision. He wrote about the way leisure, once tasted, makes the return to labor feel heavier than it did before. That rest doesn't eliminate the burden of work. It makes you more acutely aware of it because now you have something to compare it to. Medieval monks, men who had voluntarily surrendered the secular world and its obligations, still struggled with something they called aestia, a word that translates roughly as listlessness, an inability to engage with what needed to be done. A spiritual and psychological heaviness that arrived especially around midday but was also documented as a feature of transitions, from prayer to labor, from rest to duty. The Church classified aestia as one of the 7 deadly sins. But read the descriptions of it and what you're reading is not sin. You're reading Sunday afternoon. Across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, medieval Europe, across cultures with radically different structures of time and obligation, the same complaint surfaces. The return to effort is hard. The body resists it. The mind finds reasons to delay. The feeling is not laziness. It's something older and more fundamental than that. But archaeologists found something that changed how we understand all of this. And it pushes the story back much further than ancient Egypt or Rome. At various sites across Africa and Europe, sites occupied by early Homo sapiens and even by our Neanderthal cousins, researchers have found evidence of what they call discard behavior. The deliberate setting down of tools, hearths that were prepared but not used, sleeping areas that were arranged and then abandoned for a day or two, with the group returning to the same camp after an interval. What this suggests is that scheduled rest, intentional pauses in effort, may predate modern humans entirely. The rhythm of work and rest wasn't invented by administrators or religious institutions. It was already embedded in the behavioral patterns of hominids who lived hundreds of thousands of years before the Babylonians organized it into a week. And where there is rest, there is, inevitably, the end of rest. Think about what that transition would have felt like for a Neanderthal group camped at the edge of a forest in Ice Age Europe. 2 days of movement, long successful hunts or unsuccessful ones, the fire at night, children sleeping, then a pause. The group rests, the fire burns lower, the tension of the hunt is gone, replaced by something that, if you could name it, might be called safety. And then someone stands, and the group reads that movement as a signal. It is time to go again. The rest is over. What is needed next requires effort. The feeling in the group at that moment, the shift from rest state to effort state, would not have been comfortable. Comfort is what you leave behind. Effort is what you are walking into. The nervous system fires its preparation signal. The body tightens. The mind begins to run through what will be required. This is not a modern problem. This is not the product of capitalism or overwork culture or the tyranny of the calendar. It is a 300,000-year-old design feature. The transition from rest to effort has always been uncomfortable because that discomfort is functional. It sharpens attention. It mobilizes energy. Tells the body, we are no longer in safety. Respond accordingly. The Monday feeling is that signal. Running on modern hardware in a world the signal was never designed for, but running perfectly, exactly as it was always meant to run. It's worth pausing on the strangeness of the week itself. The 7-day week is not natural. It does not correspond to any astronomical cycle. The year corresponds to one orbit of the sun. The month corresponds loosely to the cycle of the moon. The day corresponds to the rotation of the earth. These are real things. They exist independent of human decision. The week corresponds to nothing. It was a choice, a Babylonian administrative convenience that was adopted, adapted, and eventually spread across the world through conquest, religion, and trade until it became so ubiquitous that we mistake it for something natural. And crucially, the week has a Monday. Or more precisely, it has a beginning, a point where the structured cycle of obligation restarts. For the first several thousand years of the 7-day week's existence, different cultures placed that beginning in different spots. In ancient Rome, the week didn't really have a recognized starting point in the way we'd recognize. The Babylonian week began on different days depending on the month. Jewish tradition placed the Sabbath, the day of rest, at the end of the week, making the beginning of the week the day after the day of rest. In most of the modern Western world, the workweek begins on Monday, preceded by Sunday, the day off, which means, structurally, that the modern Western calendar has placed the end of rest immediately before the beginning of obligation. You have your Sunday, and then you have your Monday, back to back. The pleasure and the dread separated by a single night of sleep. This is, if you think about it, a somewhat cruel design. Ancient cultures that built rest into the middle of the week, or scattered it more evenly, didn't create the same compressed transition. The anticipatory cortisol spike of a Sunday evening is in part a product of calendar architecture, the artificial placement of a hard boundary between rest and effort at a specific, predictable, recurring point. But again, the anticipation is ancient even if the calendar is not. Long before the Babylonians gave it a day, the human nervous system was already doing what it does. Reading the signs that rest was ending and beginning to prepare. So what do you do with this? There's a particular kind of relief that comes from understanding where a feeling comes from. Not because understanding removes the feeling, it usually doesn't, but because it changes your relationship to it. When the Sunday dread arrives, it can feel like a personal failing. Like something is wrong with you, or with your job, or with your life. Like if things were different, this feeling wouldn't be here. But the feeling is not diagnostic. It's not telling you that your life is wrong, or that you've made bad choices, or that something needs to change. It's telling you that your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems have done for 300,000 years. It's reading the horizon. It's preparing you. It's firing the same signal that helped your ancestors survive the transition from rest to effort, again and again, across an almost incomprehensible span of time. The Deir el-Medina worker who noted that he was feeling sad, he still showed up the next day. The Egyptian records show he did. The sadness was recorded, and then it was set aside, and then he picked up his tools. Seneca wrote about the heaviness of returning to labor after rest and then continued writing for decades. The monks who experienced aesthesia were counseled not to fight it or despair over it, but to move gently through it, to keep the hands occupied, to take small deliberate actions, to let the feeling pass through rather than trying to resolve it. This is, interestingly, very close to what modern psychology now recommends for anticipatory anxiety. Not avoidance, not suppression, not trying to logic your way out of the feeling, but gentle, deliberate engagement with the thing that the feeling is pointing toward. Small movements into the effort that the body is already trying to prepare you for. The ancient world didn't have clinical psychology. But it had thousands of years of people navigating the same transition and leaving behind their observations about what helped. Mostly what helped was moving, starting, taking the first step back into the effort, even when the effort felt impossibly heavy. Not because the feeling disappeared when you started, it usually didn't, but because motion interrupted the preparation loop. The nervous system, once actually engaged in the effort, could stop anticipating it. You didn't feel better before the hunt. You felt better during it. The Monday feeling is not a modern invention. It is not the product of your particular circumstances or your particular job or the particular shape of your particular life. It is a 300,000-year-old signal that has been firing in human bodies since before language, before agriculture, before cities or calendars or 7-day weeks. You are not the first person to sit on the edge of rest and feel the world pulling you back toward effort. You are one of billions, across an almost incomprehensible span of time, who have felt that same tightening in the chest as the horizon shifted from safety to demand. The Babylonians named the days. The Egyptians recorded the absences. The Romans wrote down the weight of it. The monks named it and prayed through it. And every one of them eventually picked up their tools and kept going. The ancient world is still inside you. The week is just where you feel it most clearly. If this made something click, if something about your own experience suddenly made a little more sense, there's more history inside you waiting to be unco.